Every year, hundreds of thousands of pieces of media, of art, of stories is put out into the world. And most, if not all of these, are forgotten. And this was no different in the early 2000s when Avatar the Last Airbender premiered. See, running from 2005 to 2008, it's arguable that this was one of the peaks of fantasy culture. You had things like the Lord of the Rings movies dominating the box office, Harry Potter becoming a staple, and of course the Star Wars franchises. And this is to say nothing of the numerous shows and other pieces of media that dabbled in traditional fantasy elements. The idea for Avatar the Last Airbender started with the idea of this bald shepherd boy and kind of grew into the world we know today. But the thing is, and what I mentioned in the beginning, is so many stories, so many great pieces of media aren't able to take hold to find an audience. And especially not the way Avatar has. It's cultivated and engaged this audience decades after it went off. So that's what I want to look at today. What is it about Avatar the Last Airbender that makes it so memorable? Both in 2008 and 2018, and now in 2023. And just a caveat here, this is just my perspective. There might be other things that make it memorable, whether it's a specific character or moment or wise saying from Uncle Iroh. But I wanted to break down my thoughts here just because I think it can be helpful, especially as it comes to telling a story effectively. Now, I don't want to beat around the cabbage on this, so I'm just going to come on and say it. To me, what makes Avatar so memorable is the way it's able to take core storytelling concepts and motions and actions and provide a subtle twist to them. The first and maybe the most, political twist is the idea of a war story. For being a kid's show, Avatar grapples with a lot of the awful aspects of war, all against the real-life backdrop of the War on Terror. I, like many other kids growing up in the early 2000s, was impacted by the war, both directly and indirectly. Something we can see directly in a character like Sokka, right? But more interesting to me is the way it's able to twist the idea of a war story. Not only just by leaning into some of the more horrific aspects of war, things like cultural genocide and mass murder and death and pollution and everything in between, but by the fact that the core conflict, the conflict with the Fire Lord, is resolved without killing him. And it's a conflict that the show highlights. It's a conflict that it forces Aang into. We never have the question of if Zuko's going to have to kill his sister. We only get the question presented to us is if Aang is going to have to kill the Fire Lord. All of these characters are children. They're child soldiers faced with this soul-crushing conflict. But it's preserving that innocence, that childlike nature, especially in Aang, that allows for him to continue to be who he is, to break the cycle of violence. A unique rebuttal of war stories and the glorification that often accompanies them. Now, this went hand in hand with another aspect of the show that I think made it memorable. And this is a smaller aspect, in my opinion, but something that should be noted. The growth of global networks of global communications had led to the growth of more foreign-inspired media, especially in Western audiences. And one of the ways we can see how Avatar benefited from this is the ongoing debate of if Avatar the Last Airbender is an anime or not. See, despite being an American-made show, it takes many inspirations from both Eastern cultures and regions as well as art styles. Now, I'm not here to weigh in on this. Feel free to let me know your opinions down in the comments, of course, but I think it's interesting to note that the show was released during this time period where you had shows crossing the Pacific, things like Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z and Naruto taking foot to varying levels of success. So to a lot of the younger audience watching Avatar the Last Airbender, it was the first introduction to this kind of culture and this kind of media, even if it's not exact one-to-one representation of what that media was. Again, this subtle twist on traditional American cartoons at the time and Japanese anime. And all of this isn't mentioning the simple premise of the show and the general coolness factor of bending. This strange mix of foreign fighting styles and elemental powers, all found and explored mostly in child characters. It allowed for this exploration of the imaginative that often all good fantasy takes on. Part of the fantasy style of Avatar the Last Airbender is it has pretty hard rules. It's not wishy-washy. Now, I'm sure there are hundreds of other videos that do a much better job explaining the difference between hard and soft sci-fi and hard and soft fantasy. But to me, at least, as it pertains to Avatar the Last Airbender, I think these constraints helped it develop its fan base. It allowed people creating fan works to work within a certain set of rules and not become overwhelmed with the sheer number of possibilities that magic can often open up, all while cultivating its own established style, to the point that any type of elemental system often gets related to Avatar. One of my favorite and most impactful moments of the show, to me at least, is the moment that Katara confronts her mother's killer. We've got an oldest buildup. Katara's struggle for revenge and justice, Aang's pleas to find peace and forgiveness. So when we finally get to this moment, get to the moment where Katara is confronting the killer, we get another twist. Now, a typical story would handle this two different ways. Either Katara kills the man, and she has to deal with the guilt that comes with murdering someone, or she finds forgiveness in her heart. She's able to move past the death of her mother. But instead we get this third option. Something that Avatar often does when it finds itself written into these narrative corners. No, Katara will not murder this man, but she also won't forgive him. The one reason she finds herself unable to do the act is because he's so pathetic. He is just a cog in the machinery of war, this representation of the banality of evil. And we see Katara's conflict evolve from just trying to redeem her mother to get revenge, to hold the system itself accountable. And it goes hand in hand with Aang's desire not to kill the Fire Lord, to not kill anyone. He doesn't want to surrender to war. He doesn't want to let war take that part away from him. He doesn't want to become another piece in the cycle of violence. Much like Katara, none of our characters, whether it's Aang or Zuko or Sokka or Toph or even Uncle Iroh, have to forgive the Fire Lord, have to forgive the man running the machine of war that was the Fire Nation. But they also don't have to let it take anything more from them. And I hear what you're saying. Yes, it can feel contrived. Yes, it can feel unrealistic. And yes, it is impactful. So often we're given the heroic character, this altruistic and almost perfect individual, someone like Luke or Katniss or Harry, that's going to save the world. And yes, these characters have setbacks, and yes, these characters have flaws, but they aren't defined by them. Throughout the first season, what's emphasized over and over again about Aang is how he ran away. It's how he failed. In fact, for almost the entire run of the show, it is this perpetual and everlasting truth that follows Aang, something that people are reminding him of again and again. No, the Avatar disappeared 100 years ago. No, the Avatar didn't stop the war. And when we look at the rest of our characters, we see this failure sticking out in one way or another. You have a character like Zuko, who failed to live up to his father's expectations, to the point that he's introduced as this rogue laughingstock of the Fire Nation. You have Uncle Iroh, who failed not only the Fire Nation in his inability to take Ba Sing Se, but also his son. And then you have side characters like Sokka, who fails to protect his tribe, who fails to be a man. Or someone like Katara, who fails to waterbend. And even Toph is seen as a failure in the eyes of her parents, her inability to fit in with the world they inhabit. Instead of solely focusing on a character flaw to show character growth, they focus on a character failure. All of these characters also have flaws, and oftentimes it's these flaws that lead to the failures. But the emphasis and focus on the repercussions of these failures is this small twist that really makes it more memorable. Aang's culture, his people, are gone. The stakes literally can't get higher. He has already failed to save the people he cares the most about. And to me, the message is simple. The world can be saved by those who aren't perfect. The world can be saved by those who have failed, whether it's to be a hero, to be a leader, to be a father, or to be a son, if only you believe that you can do better. And the reason we have to accept that they can be better is because they're children. They're going to grow. They're going to learn. Throughout the course of the show, we're reminded again and again in small but substantial ways about how young our characters are. Not in the physical sense, but in the emotional and maturity sense. Whether it's the desire to go penguin sledding or ride a giant fish, or the immature burps and comments, or the small but sharp anxieties of new love. And all of our characters struggle with this push and pull of childhood and adulthood. And we have a character like Azula, who seems to be succeeding so much in being an adult until she isn't, until she doesn't know who she is anymore. She sees herself as the hero, as the chosen one, as perfect. And whether it was her aggressive nature, her wielding of relationships like weapons in and of themselves, all of this was in pursuit of living up to perfection, living up to her father's expectations. Not of a child, but of a warrior, of a leader. It's the same sense of responsibility that we see Zuko struggle with. And it's why we see characters like Uncle Iroh guiding Zuko to find a more healthy and substantial way to learn not only who they are, but who they want to be. And this push and pull between childhood and adulthood and the responsibilities that come with it isn't clear cut. Aang does have responsibility as the Avatar. Zuko does have a responsibility to the Fire Nation as the prince. So instead of just embracing or rejecting childlike innocence, it finds a balance. A balance between who you are and responsibilities that are thrusted upon you. A balance between running from and compromising yourself to responsibilities. And all of this circles back into one of the core themes of the show, that of identity. Aang is constantly struggling between himself and the expectations thrusted upon him. He's a monk, a pacifist, having to stop a genocidal war. It's this dark irony that's so easy to overlook. And we see Aang and almost all of the characters overcommit to their responsibilities and lose themselves. We see Aang make the decision to give up Katara to master the Avatar state, only to be struck down. We see Zuko compromise himself and turn on Team Avatar, only for him to not be happy, to still not have any honor, at least in his eyes. And it's only when they're able to disregard these preconceived notions of themselves and the world that they're able to succeed, that they're able to save the day, to find who they are, to win the battle, to end the war. And even in a character like Toph, someone who seems so confident in who they are, we see this expectation and this conflict rise up in her. It's part of the reason she resents not just her family, but oftentimes Katara. She's not just an earthbender, she's a girl. Someone who wants to be seen as pretty, as motherly. She wants to be socially accepted, not just as a earthbending master, someone who's often depicted as a boulder-like figure, but also as a young woman. Or we can look to a character like Sokka, someone who sees himself as useless, as a non-bender, but also someone that carries this internal responsibility to be a leader, to protect his tribe, and yet spends so much time believing he's completely powerless to do so. And then you have a character like Zuko, where this push and pull is literally depicted between the natural and the scarred, between who he is and who the Fire Nation wants him to be, who his father wants him to be. Both Zuko and Aang's lowest moments take place in a storm. Whether it's Aang running away from being that Avatar, or Zuko standing alone, asking the world to strike him down with lightning. All because of the expectations the world has put upon them, and they've put upon themselves. There's a lot of different things that makes Avatar so memorable, and a lot of different things you can get from the show. Whether it's your favorite character, or your favorite moments, or the world itself. It sparks imagination and it resonates with people for a variety of different reasons. When the pandemic started in 2020, I thought it was fascinating to see all these online articles talking about Avatar the Last Airbender. How it was dominating Netflix despite not having the benefits of being new or being promoted or anything like that. It was this 12-year-old cartoon. And I just kind of found it ironic. All of these articles saying that it came out of nowhere, acting as if there wasn't this passionate fan base there all along. All these people inspired to create their own worlds, to theorize, to create, to build. Even if it was as small as just exchanging their favorite Uncle Iroh quotes. And it's all of these things, right, that help us understand that Avatar, it's not going anywhere. That even into 2023, no matter how many bad adaptations we get, the core reason, the core message that resonates with so many people is still there. It's this message of war and peace, of loss and love, of failure, and of hope. Hey everyone, thanks for watching again. I know this was supposed to come out a while ago, but I appreciate y'all sticking with me. Again, make sure you like, subscribe. Let me know your favorite Uncle Iroh quote down below, and yeah, I'll see you next time. Peace.